In Chapter 5, Phyllis Day and Jerome Shield look at the arrival of social welfare and the various systems associated with it in colonial America as England moves many of its troubled citizens to the shores of America. The Phyllis Day refers to this somewhere in the chapter as the largest and most successful welfare program in history, and more about that as we go along in this chapter. As we close the last few chapters with the Elizabethan Poor Laws of 1601, I suspect you're probably familiar with some of the things that will be on the next couple of slides. But again, the Poor Laws place the emphasis upon the public responsibility for the poor, laying the groundwork for government-sponsored social welfare programs of today. Now, the interesting thing is we had been talking about how it emphasized family responsibility first, but then at the close of the last lecture, in fact, we talked about the fact that if the family was unable, the government, then the local government became responsible and provided such things as almshouses for the indigent poor, the poor that couldn't take care of themselves. So that's where the local responsibility comes in here. The principles of the Poor Laws, as mentioned here, again, local responsibility for the poor, family responsibility, including relatives, and a residency requirement. It wasn't you couldn't just move into the community and expect the local government to take care of you. You know the government's required that you be there and be a part of the community for a period of time before you could get assistance from them. As we had also spoke about when we talked about the collapse of the feudal system in Europe in the Middle Ages, so to speak, beggars and vagrants were really on the rise because industry couldn't support the increase in labor force brought on by industrialization and the end of the feudal era. And this continued to be a problem at the time that the colonies began to be settled in the 1600s in America. So the Poor Laws were really implemented to address those needs. The Poor Laws, incidentally, also supported the needs of industry because of the residency requirement. You know, keeping poor people local created a ready workforce. Now, remember, when you have people who want a job, that helps to keep wages lower because if you're say you're in a job working McDonald's and you don't like the wage you're being paid and you demand a higher pay, the employer can choose to not give you that higher pay because he knows there's other people out there that are really eager to take your job at that low wage. And so a ready workforce keeps wages low, and as we talked about in the last lecture, that means higher profits for business and industry. So the Poor Laws really were of benefit to the economic system as well. In America, the Poor Law's emphasis on settlement, the residency requirement, and family responsibility were the things that really helped to ensure that too many poor wouldn't overwhelm any one community. The communities that settled really, I think, charity for the most part, a lot of charity came from the churches and things like this, and what programs were required of the local government, the local community. The communities really didn't have a lot of resources for that, and so. Too many of the needy individuals could really overwhelm the community. So the Poor Laws helped to make sure that didn't happen. But still, the family was central to the maintenance of the economic order. It was considered to be the place where future contributors to the economic system were born and bred. And also during this period of time, with the introduction or the invention of the spinning jenny, home manufacturing also became a way for people, mostly women at the home, to continue to be at home, take care of the family and the nurturance and the home and hearth needs, let's say, of the family unit, while also doing some things to contribute to the wealth of the family. So oftentimes they would have these what do you call them, kind of get-togethers, where they would all get together and spin yarn together. They were called spinning bees in barns and local things in the communities. And so work actually during this period of time became combined with pleasure and community activity. And out of all this Protestant work ethic, the notion that everybody should be working and contributing and it's a moral and healthy thing to do, that's where that became internalized, and again is the foundation for one of those 9 American values that Day talks about. going the wrong way here. It's stepping forward in history. The work ethic also helped to minimize reliance on public support and help to maximize family wealth. So the more people, you wanted to work because you wanted to feel good about yourself. You wanted your neighbors to believe that you were a useful person and a contributor to the community. And so because people were working, there was more money coming into families. And the prevailing thought during that period of time that, I know we've all heard at one time or another in our lives, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. That is, if you're not doing much of anything with it, you're going to get into trouble. Focus on economics in families meant that if a family wasn't productive, if there were parents who really weren't contributing to the community, then the community made efforts to remove children from them because they felt that they were not teaching them the proper thing. And there were a number of different ways of going about that. And this slide says faming out, but it should be farming out. Indenture and apprenticeships. Indentured. Some people came over from England as basically as economic slaves, and we'll be talking about that. They settled more in the South, but they did spread out in the Middle Atlantic states as well. Some, so that somebody paid their passage over here, and in exchange for that, they continued to work for that person free of charge, more or less, for a number of years. In order to pay back that debt for their passage. Farming out, children could be removed from families and sent out to farms, basically where their labor was needed. If they were felt that they weren't being raised properly, apprenticeships, they could be put in the care of local artisans and manufacturers in order to learn a trade from that person. So these are kinds of things that were being done in those days to help, really to save potentially productive members of troubled families. Those families that were not able to maintain their own financial independence were really seen not only as economically dangerous, but also morally unfit, and so it was believed that they should not have their children. As I said, Phyllis Day referred to the colonization of America as the largest and most successful social welfare program in history because, really, England, its problems of overpopulation, poverty, criminality, undesirable people in the colonies, all of those people were the people who wound up coming across the ocean to the colonies. They were very in some respects unhappy people. Those seeking religious freedom, for instance, were quite unhappy with the controls of the Church of England, and so they rid themselves of that. They rid themselves of poor people. They rid themselves of criminals. Some of them coming over as indentured servants. But at the same time, while all those social problems were sent overseas, they eventually began to gain a lot of profit from the raw resources that were available for its use. And a reading of American history, of course, talks about that. And in fact, the slave trade became a part of that golden triangle of resources flowing to England and the manufactured resources going elsewhere, and the slaves coming back to the United States ultimately. By the mid-1700s, and we're still talking about pre-revolutionary America, the colonies had almshouses established for the aged, disabled, and the ill. These were the worthy poor, considered to be worthy because they were not able to care for themselves. The impotent poor, as they were known, in other words, those that just were not able to work and care for themselves. But as the population centers developed other problems with poverty and other individuals out of work who were able-bodied but not working, couldn't get a job, and were unemployed, still continued to be a problem. And so in addition to those almshouses, workhouses and houses of correction and poor farms and those kinds of institutions were established to administer punishment and hard labor for those who were able-bodied but were not working. By this time, you really have the poor separated into three classes: the worthy or impotent poor, the unworthy or able-bodied poor, and then the third class of dependent children, which really were seen again. Primarily, the concern was about their potential to contribute to the economy in the future. When we when we talk about social welfare in America, there's a distinction between two different types of relief. Relief is another word for welfare, right? Uh, and you don't often hear these terms used in the modern day. You'll see them in the text from time to time, and in other works about the social welfare system. But by and large, these are kind of antiquated terms. But still, they serve to explain two different ways of providing assistance. Really, two primary different ways of providing assistance to needy individuals. One is indoor relief, which really in the colonial days that was the focus of most of the legislation in those days. And this is aid that is provided in an institution, in some place other than one's own home. So indoor relief, you might be living in an almshouse or a workhouse or a poor farm, and so you weren't just handed money or goods in order to maintain yourself in your home, but you really are rather put somewhere and taught and cared for in that setting. That's indoor relief. The other type of relief in colonial America, and really today still, is called outdoor relief. It's not called that anymore, but this is direct assistance that includes cash benefits or commodities and things like that. Let's say, for instance, in today's lingo, that would provide assistance to people who live in their own homes. And in colonial times, this was really only permissible for those impotent, or the poor, the disabled, the aged, or the widowed. So indoor relief, which is helping people by putting them in institutions, basically, giving them to institutions and caring for them there and having them work. And outdoor relief, which is providing direct assistance, cash, and other kinds of things to individuals in their own homes. But in any event, in colonial America, as it continues today, there is very, very little relief. It really wasn't anything that anyone could get comfortable with, and so there was a deterrent to the notion of seeking help in our system under our social welfare system. And in fact, communities could participate in what was called warning out, which is really essentially evicting persons who looked like they were going to be on the public dole, so they could reduce their needy rolls by chasing people out of town, basically, if they weren't being productive. And again, to get public assistance, communities also required individuals to have been in that community for a period of time. That's the settlement requirement, or residency requirement is what it's called in more recent terms. And really, residency requirements existed in American states for a number of for a long time. It's just only been within the last, 30 years or so that the last of the residency requirements to receive public assistance in different states were eliminated. So the settlement requirement really kind of said that if you were from outside the community, we weren't going to take care of you. So there were ways the community could deal with the problem of relief and keep their dependent roles relatively small. I'm going to talk a little bit about what was going on geographically and socially in the different regions in colonial America. And if you can visualize a map of the 13 colonies up and down the east coast of the United States, you can picture it really in three regions: in New England, the Middle Atlantic states, and the South. And the South at this time ended at Georgia. We didn't get Florida until later. So really Georgia north to Maine. And we'll start with New England in the north. Most of those colonies up there were established by individuals who came to America seeking religious freedom. They brought along with that religious freedom, and if you'll recall from our talk on, I think, Chapter 3 about the rise of the Protestant Reformation and how that impacted attitudes about work and wealth. Remember, being wealthy was sort of a sign of God's favor and assured your salvation if you took care of needy people, right? They brought that sort of work ethic with them, that sense of Puritan morality with them, that hard work was the way to salvation. And so there was a strong work ethic that was evident in the New England colonies rather. So when welfare was implemented, it really kind of focused on requiring individuals to work to get benefits and also to be adhere to religion. And if you didn't do that, you could be rejected. In fact, the colonies had an opportunity where those colonies were formed and were able to reject people who wanted to move in there if they didn't have the right religion or if they had really poor potential to contribute economically to the colony's well-being. Meanwhile, the southern colonies, skipping the middle section at the moment, were developed mainly as commercial ventures, and so many of the population that settled there were indentured servants. Individuals who wanted to get established in the American colonies and maybe established farms, and I think that it was felt that the South was a potential for productive, farmlands and things like that, and favorable climates and those kinds of things. And so, individuals would seek out people to come along to work their farms. And what they did in many respects was get people out of prison. The individuals, or England, would release individuals from prison, or people that were unemployed and were always at risk of being put back into a workhouse or a house of correction or something. Got those people out of that system, paid their way over to America, and in exchange for that, then those individuals were required to continue to work for these individuals for a period of time. Again, essentially economic slavery for a period of time. But the difference between economic slavery and the slavery that eventually was established in the South was these individuals had a chance to work their way out of their indentured status, out of their slavery, whereas the slavery based on race, there was no out. But So southern colonies were really commercial ventures, and the differences in the reasons for the settlement of this regions, Day and Shield think is one of the reasons why slavery survived longer in the South. The North being based on a desire for religious freedom and really a focus on faith and good living and those kinds of things. I mean, and the South really based more upon economic reasons. And so the institution of slavery, the institution of that required individuals, large groups of individuals to work for somebody and to have to stay there, really kind of grew out of this commercial venture in the South. So the Middle Atlantic colonies are the third region that are left, and you have the South focusing on slave labor, and indentured servitude. New England screening its immigrants, not taking people who didn't look productive or who weren't of the right religion and things like this. And so the Middle Atlantic region sort of saw a funneling of many other immigrants into that area. And while some of those were under indentured, they were coming for a number of different reasons and with a number of different backgrounds. Economics and philosophies were different from region to region also. So in the North, the New England and Mid-Atlantic regions, farming and fishing were probably the first of the industries there, but eventually trade and manufacturing became more prevalent there as well. With that, immigrants a lot of times would come, especially to the population centers that developed in the North and the Mid-Atlantic areas around the manufacturing. Populations would come from overseas, and there would be a lot of high needs in those cities and population centers. Low income, again because of the profit motive, and high social needs as immigration continued to increase, and so that was sort of a characteristic in that area. Whereas in the South, it really developed more of a farming economy and relied upon the use of slavery to make that work. All the indentured servants, I guess, were taken care of in England by that time, and so it was far more profitable and cheaper to use Africans as slaves. And also, I guess, if you look at it from an economic standpoint, there wasn't any kind of turnover, and in fact, the slaves would produce new slaves. And so there's a number of different reasons why, from the standpoint of the large farm owners in the South, that the plantation owners, that engaging in the slave trade was something that was profitable and useful for them. And so they really didn't focus so much on the market economy. And just because of the nature of the area, there was more of a more of a tolerance for human misfortune. People didn't expect a whole lot. But also, if you were a slave, your social welfare needs would largely be ignored. There were class differences emerging in the colonies in the first half of the 1700s into certainly an upper aristocratic class. They were largely made of third and fourth generation wealthy people that were mostly Protestant. The middle class, who were the farmers, the artisans, laborers, again, mostly Protestant. These are coming from England, which was largely associated with the Church of England, but other religions that kind of broke off from that. And then the lower class were largely non-English immigrants, non-Protestant, non-white, not owning any property or businesses or anything like that. So you had these three classes beginning to emerge even as early as the 1700s. Benjamin Franklin, of course, was one of the great thinkers of the 1700s in America, and scientist, inventor, diplomat, politician, writer of the Constitution, a participant in the constitutional conventions, at least, and the Declaration of Independence and all of that. One of our founding fathers. And as much as his attitudes are revered, he had a rather peculiar kind of idea about poverty, and he really saw the cause of poverty as the individual, lying with the individual. If you know the story of Ben Franklin, and I don't know how much of this is true and how much of it is fantasy, but I remember in elementary school being taught how Ben Franklin moved to Philadelphia and was poor and just had a few pennies on his person when he arrived in the city and had a loaf of bread and was walking down the street of Philadelphia with a loaf of bread under his arm. And this young woman who was to become his wife was on the porch of this house going by her on the front step of this house and laughing at him as he walked past her. And this is how they met. Probably not true, but in any event, the portion of that story, I guess, that may have some truth is that he started out a very poor individual, and but through his own devices, whatever they might have been, some perhaps nefarious, I don't know, he became a very, very powerful individual in around the world, in fact, and in his time, and so. In his experience, this system worked fine. He wanted to work, and he was bright, and he wanted to try out new things, and he was ambitious, and it worked well for him. And so, as far as he was concerned, this system worked well. And his belief was that if we intruded into it with social responsibility for the needy and the poor, would only foster their dependence. It would only discourage them from taking care of things for themselves. And he believed that really all of the money in society went through the hands of the poor because the rich would consume products made by the poor. So if they had no money, it was really their own fault that that all their products were purchased from them, and so they should have all this money. And he couldn't understand why it was that they weren't wealthy. Well, that's sort of I think kind of a distorted kind of logic, and I think most of you would agree with that, but this was some of the thinking of the day, that poverty was the result of the individual failure and living a poor lifestyle. Others believed that the poor existed to take care of those things in life that no one else wanted to, and that really, that all they needed was some hope of reward that would keep them cheerful in the midst of all their dangers and toils. So the poor really didn't have much to look forward to in those days, I think. And again, when you look at the basic attitudes about those who are poor today, as silly as some of those thoughts may seem to us today, they still underlie the foundation for a lot of our social welfare programming and our beliefs about recipients in America. Just as veterans were seen as worthy poor. By the way, this slide mentions disabled vets actually were beginning to get compensated for their service to society by the government. The vets were some of the first ones to really get benefits from federal government. In fact, although we didn't have a federal government yet, but women remained under male domination throughout this period of time, and so really the working males were the ones who were running the colonies in those days and were the ones who were most successful. Okay, so on that note, I will close my talk on Day's Chapter 5. If you're left with questions from any of this, I am available to answer them if you'll just contact me. That'll do it for this week. Bye now.